Christchurch, New Zealand, a quiet, close-knit city where people still left their doors unlocked, and parents trusted that their children were safe walking home from school. It was the kind of place where neighbors greeted each other with smiles and kids spent their weekends riding bikes through the streets. But beneath that comforting layer of normalcy, one story would soon tear that sense of safety apart, the story of Marie Davis. Marie wasn't a troubled teen. She wasn't rebellious or wild. She was just 15, bright, curious, and full of life. Her teachers described her as cheerful and well-mannered, the kind of student who cared about everyone around her. Her friends said she loved music, loved to laugh, and loved taking pictures, a typical teenager with big dreams and a heart that trusted easily. She lived with her mother and sister, in a small but happy home. Her father had passed away, and Marie's mother worked hard to give her daughters the best life she could. Despite their struggles, they were a loving family, and Marie was the light that kept their home warm. Saturday, April 5, 2008. Marie spent the evening chatting with friends online and texting from her phone. She was planning to go out, nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Around that time, she told her mom she'd be home later. When her mother awoke the next morning, Marie's bed was empty. At first, it didn't seem too strange, maybe she stayed over at a friend's house. But as the day stretched on and her phone went silent, that calm turned into unease. By that evening, panic set in. Marie wasn't answering calls. She wasn't seen by any of her friends. And that's when her family did what every parent dreads, they called the police. Detectives began retracing her steps. They checked the local parks, the schools, and the nearby bus stops. They questioned friends, family, and neighbors, hoping someone had seen her. But no one had. It was as if Marie had vanished into thin air. Posters with her smiling face appeared across Christchurch. Search teams moved through the city's outskirts, through the woods, through the riverbanks, calling her name, praying for a sign. Days turned into nights, and every sunrise brought less hope. Her mother, distraught and sleepless, pleaded with the public for help. "Please, if anyone knows where my daughter is, please bring her home." The nation watched as her story spread through news broadcasts. A young girl, gone without a trace. Behind the scenes, detectives began uncovering subtle details, phone records, text messages, people she may have met recently. And one name began to surface repeatedly, Dean Cameron, a man who lived nearby. A man Marie knew. A man no one suspected could harm her. He wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows, he was someone from her own community. Someone who looked ordinary. Someone trusted. For 12 agonizing days, her family lived between hope and horror. Every ring of the phone brought both relief and dread. Every knock on the door made her mother's heart race, praying it was good news. But on April 18th, that hope was shattered forever. Searchers scouring the Waimakariri River, just north of Christchurch, made a horrific discovery. Beneath the calm surface of the water, wrapped tightly in bedding, weighed down with concrete blocks, was the body of Marie Davis. Her disappearance was no longer a mystery. It was now a tragedy. The joy, the laughter, the dreams, all drowned by the cruelty of someone she once trusted. The police, the media, and the public were stunned. How could something like this happen here, in a quiet, peaceful neighborhood? How could a man capable of such evil live among them, unseen, unnoticed? And that's when the city of Christchurch began to see the truth. Sometimes, the most terrifying monsters don't hide in the dark. Sometimes, they live right next door. The disappearance and death of Marie Davis wasn't just a crime, it was a wake-up call. A brutal reminder that evil can wear a friendly smile, live across the street, and strike when no one expects it. Marie's story was only beginning to unfold, and the investigation that followed would uncover a past so disturbing, it would change how New Zealand saw its justice system forever. When detectives uncovered Marie's body, the entire country demanded answers. Who could do something so brutal, to a 15-year-old girl? The answer was far more horrifying than anyone expected. Because the killer wasn't some faceless predator from far away. He was a man Marie knew, a man who lived in her neighborhood, Dean Cameron. Dean Cameron was 39 years old, an average-looking man, quiet, polite to neighbors, and seemingly harmless. He worked in road maintenance, lived a simple life, and didn't attract attention. To most people, he was just another ordinary local, the kind of man you'd greet at the shop without a second thought. But behind that calm exterior, Cameron carried a dark past. A past that should have kept him far away from freedom. Cameron had already been convicted of sexual violence before. 9 months before Marie's disappearance, he was released from prison after serving time for sexually violating his former partner. He was supposed to be monitored, evaluated, and managed carefully, but somewhere, somehow, the system failed. There were no warning signs recorded, no restrictions keeping him away from young girls. No one knew what he was capable of doing again. Marie had met Cameron through mutual acquaintances, he wasn't a total stranger. To her, he seemed friendly, someone safe to talk to. He offered her rides, small favors, things that made him seem trustworthy. But beneath that mask of normalcy, he was studying her, gaining her trust. Predators like Cameron don't need to hide in the shadows, they blend in until it's too late. Detectives pieced together the timeline. On the night Marie went missing, Cameron had been seen near her home. Phone records placed him in the area. Witnesses noticed his car driving late into the night. It was later revealed that he had lured Marie, under the guise of friendship, and once she was alone, his true nature took over. What happened next was pure evil. He sexually assaulted her, then murdered her in cold blood, silencing her forever to hide what he had done. After taking her life, he tried to cover his tracks. He wrapped her body in bedding from his home, tied it down with concrete blocks, and drove to the Waimakariri River, where he dumped her body beneath the dark water, hoping the current would erase his crime. For days, he acted like nothing had happened. He went to work. He smiled at people. He slept in the same bed, knowing what lay beneath the river just miles away. A predator walking freely among the same people who were desperately searching for Marie. But monsters always leave traces. Forensic investigators found DNA evidence in his home and on Marie's belongings. Security footage placed his vehicle near the river. And when police confronted him, Cameron denied everything, showing no emotion, no remorse. In interviews, detectives described him as cold, manipulative, and disturbingly calm. Even as the evidence mounted, he maintained his innocence, pretending to be just another helpful witness. But why? Why would a man like Dean Cameron destroy an innocent life? Psychologists later described him as a high-risk sexual offender, someone whose desires and violence were deeply intertwined. He sought control, power, and domination. Marie was not a random target, she was vulnerable, young, and trusting. She represented the innocence he could crush to feel powerful. This wasn't an act of passion or rage. It was a calculated act of predation. When the truth finally came out, Christchurch was horrified to learn that this man had been living freely among them, despite his violent history. The system had given him a second chance, a chance he used to destroy a child's life. The community's grief turned into anger. Parents began questioning how many other predators were walking their streets, unnoticed. How many other families could face the same nightmare? Dean Cameron's mask of normalcy had finally cracked, revealing what he truly was. A monster hiding in plain sight. He lived quietly, he smiled politely, and behind that ordinary face was a predator waiting for his next victim. And the girl who trusted him, who never saw the danger standing beside her, paid the price with her life. The truth about Dean Cameron exposed a terrifying reality. That evil doesn't always come from dark alleys or distant strangers. Sometimes, it's the man next door, quiet, familiar, and unseen. Until the day his darkness takes everything away. After months of investigation, countless hours of interviews, and an unrelenting hunt for truth, the evidence was finally undeniable. DNA, phone records, witness statements, all pointed to one man. Dean Cameron had taken the life of 15-year-old Marie Davis. Now, the case that had haunted Christchurch was heading to court. In August 2009, the courtroom fell silent as Cameron was brought before the judge. He was charged with murder and sexual violation, the two crimes that had shattered an entire community. Reporters filled the benches, cameras flashed outside, and the public waited anxiously for justice. For over a year, they had followed every headline, every update, every word of this case, hoping the system would deliver the justice Marie deserved. During the trial, the prosecution painted a chilling picture. They presented the timeline, how Cameron gained Marie's trust, how he lured her, and how he carried out the assault and murder. They showed evidence that placed him near the river that night. They revealed the DNA traces linking him directly to the crime. And they described in disturbing detail the way he had disposed of her body, methodical, planned, and remorseless. Every piece of evidence told the same story. That this was not an accident, this was cold-blooded murder. Cameron's defense tried to argue innocence. They claimed there was no clear motive, that the evidence was circumstantial. But when the prosecution showed his previous conviction for sexual violence, just 9 months before Marie's death, the courtroom gasped. It was the final crack in the mask he had worn so well. The jury saw through his lies. After weeks of testimony, deliberation, and emotional statements, the verdict was announced. The words everyone had been waiting for, guilty of murder and sexual violation. Dean Cameron showed no emotion. He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He just stared blankly ahead, as if the life he had taken meant nothing at all. The courtroom erupted in tears, Marie's family holding each other, sobbing quietly, while others stared at Cameron in disbelief. This wasn't just justice being served, it was the closing of a wound that would never fully heal. The judge's voice cut through the silence. For the murder of Marie Davis, Dean Cameron is sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum non-parole period of 19 years. For the sexual violation, he is given preventive detention, meaning he will never be released unless he is no longer deemed a danger to society. It was one of the harshest sentences possible under New Zealand law. The judge didn't hold back his words. He called Cameron's actions brutal and despicable, and his lack of remorse chilling. He warned that this man was a high risk to the community, and that society must be protected from him for as long as possible. Outside the courtroom, people gathered, some crying, some silent, some holding candles in memory of Marie. Her mother and sister thanked the police, the public, and the court, but behind their words was a grief that no sentence could ever erase. For them, justice had come, but peace had not. Because no number of years, no legal punishment, could bring Marie back. Marie Davis should have been finishing high school. She should have been celebrating birthdays, chasing dreams, living life. But all of that ended the night Dean Cameron decided to destroy everything. Justice was served, yes, but it was justice after the fact. And for many, it felt like the system had failed long before the crime even happened. A known predator had been free to walk the streets, and a young girl had paid the price. The sentencing of Dean Cameron was not just a punishment, it was a message. A warning to society that evil can hide behind a friendly face. That monsters don't always look like monsters. And that when systems fail to protect the innocent, tragedy is inevitable. Cameron's life sentence would ensure he could never hurt another person again. But the wound he left on Christchurch, and on Marie's family, will never fade. For every parent who kissed their child goodnight after that day, Marie's story became a reminder. Sometimes the real danger isn't out there in the dark, it's living right next door. When a tragedy like the death of Marie Davis unfolds, the first question people ask is why. But the second, and often the hardest to answer, is how did this happen? How did a man with a known history of sexual violence slip through the cracks? How was he allowed to walk free, living quietly in a neighborhood filled with children, while the system looked the other way? To understand the true depth of this failure, we must look back at the days following Marie's disappearance. When Marie was first reported missing on April 7, 2008, police treated it as a runaway case. They believed she might have left home voluntarily, maybe to visit a friend or escape family stress. But those who knew Marie knew that wasn't possible. She wasn't rebellious. She wasn't careless. She loved her family too much to vanish without a word. The first 48 hours, the most critical in any missing person case, were slipping away. While her family begged for a full-scale search, time was being lost. By the time the investigation fully mobilized, nearly 3 days had passed. 3 days that could have changed everything. If the police had treated her case as an abduction from the start, they might have discovered the connection to Dean Cameron sooner. He lived nearby. He had a criminal record. He should have been one of the first people questioned, but he wasn't. For nearly a week, Cameron walked freely through the same streets where police were searching for Marie. He even pretended to join conversations about her disappearance, acting like a concerned neighbor. He fooled everyone, including the people trained to find him. But the failure didn't start there. It started long before Marie's disappearance, in the justice system itself. Dean Cameron had been released from prison just 9 months earlier, after serving time for sexually violating a former partner. Experts had already labeled him a high-risk offender. He was supposed to be closely monitored. He was supposed to receive psychological treatment. But he didn't. Somehow, the supervision system failed. No one followed up. No one checked in. No one ensured that this man, a proven predator, wasn't slipping back into the same dark behavior. The system's silence became Marie's death sentence. When police finally linked Cameron to Marie, it was too late. The evidence was already buried under layers of water and lies. Search teams worked tirelessly, scouring the Waimakariri River, dragging it for days, until finally, after 12 excruciating days of hope and heartbreak, they found her. The image of the officers carrying her body from the river would stay burned in the memory of every person who saw it. It was no longer just a search for a missing girl, it had become the recovery of a victim, and the revelation of an institutional failure. The Christchurch community began asking questions. Why wasn't Cameron being watched? Why didn't the system have stricter checks for released sex offenders? Why did the early investigation move so slowly? For every why, there was only silence. Government officials promised to review procedures. Reports were written. But for Marie's family, none of that mattered. Because every promise came too late, after the one person who needed protection was already gone. Marie's mother, through tears, told reporters. She trusted him. She thought he was safe. But she didn't know, she couldn't know. Those words cut deeper than any headline. Because they revealed the tragic truth, Marie wasn't just failed by one man, she was failed by a system meant to keep her safe. Even the judge who sentenced Cameron spoke openly about this failure. He warned that people like Dean Cameron should never be released without proper treatment or supervision. He described the risk as highly foreseeable, meaning this tragedy could have been prevented. And that's what made Marie's death even more painful. It wasn't just a random act of evil. It was an avoidable one. Every time a young girl walks home from school, every time a parent checks their child's phone late at night, Marie's story echoes like a warning. She reminds us that real danger doesn't always come from strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes, it comes from the very systems designed to protect us. Systems that looked away when they should have watched closely. Marie Davis's case forced New Zealand to confront hard questions about justice, safety, and prevention. But no policy, no reform, no law can undo what happened that night. If the system had done its job, Marie might still be here. Instead, her story stands as a haunting reminder. That when we ignore the warning signs of evil, we give it permission to destroy the innocent. The trial of Marie Davis's killer, Dean Cameron, began with a mix of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. For the people of Christchurch, it wasn't just another criminal case, it was a test of justice. Could the system truly deliver closure for a 15-year-old girl whose only mistake was trusting the wrong person? The courtroom was packed from the very first day. Journalists lined the aisles, cameras flashed outside the courthouse, and the world turned its gaze toward the man now accused of committing one of New Zealand's most chilling crimes. Marie's family sat quietly, clutching photos of her smiling face, while the defense prepared to argue that Cameron wasn't a monster, that his actions were misunderstood, that there was no proof of intentional murder. But what unfolded inside that courtroom revealed a level of depravity and calculated cruelty that silenced everyone in the room. The prosecution painted a haunting picture. They revealed evidence that linked Cameron directly to the scene, the bedsheet that matched one from his home, the concrete blocks he had access to, and the DNA traces found on Marie's body. Witnesses testified about his disturbing behavior, how he'd lurked around teenage girls, how he'd earned a reputation for being too friendly with the young. Some recalled how he would offer them rides, using his charm to hide his true intentions. The jury listened in silence as forensic experts described how meticulously he had tried to hide his crime, how he'd wrapped her body, transported it under the cover of night, and dumped it in the cold, murky waters of the Waimakariri River. And yet, even as the evidence mounted, Cameron sat there, emotionless, cold, eyes empty. No sign of regret. No flicker of humanity. Marie's mother couldn't hold back tears as the prosecution displayed photos of her daughter, once alive, now reduced to evidence in a murder trial. She had to sit there and listen to strangers describe her child's final moments, the violence, the fear, the betrayal. Outside the courthouse, people began calling Cameron the monster next door. The name spread through headlines, talk shows, and conversations across the country. Parents warned their children that evil doesn't always come in the form of a stranger, sometimes, it hides behind a friendly face just a few doors away. But the defense wasn't ready to surrender. They argued there wasn't enough to prove premeditation, that perhaps Marie's death was an accident. They tried to cast doubt on the timeline, suggesting that Cameron panicked and acted irrationally afterward. They wanted the jury to believe that he hadn't planned it, that he wasn't truly evil, just careless and frightened. Yet, the evidence told a different story. The calculated way he disposed of her body. The lies he told to police. The attempt to erase every trace of his crime. This wasn't panic. This was control. This was intent. After weeks of testimony, emotional breakdowns, and painful details, the jury finally withdrew to deliberate. Hours passed like days. The air in the courtroom grew heavy, no one moved, no one spoke. Then, the doors opened. The jurors returned, faces pale, eyes tired. The foreman stood, holding the verdict in trembling hands. Guilty of murder. The words cut through the room like a blade. Marie's family cried, hugged each other, and for a brief moment, there was relief. A monster had been unmasked. Justice had spoken. Dean Cameron was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum non-parole period of 15 years. But even as the sentence was read, a question lingered in the air: was it enough? 15 years for the brutal murder of a 15-year-old girl. 15 years for the pain, the terror, the loss of an entire future. Many felt the punishment didn't fit the crime. Some said the system had failed, that no amount of prison time could truly represent the life that was stolen. Others believed at least some form of justice had been served. And while Cameron sat behind bars, the people of Christchurch were left to rebuild, trying to find peace in a world that had shown them its darkest face. Marie Davis became more than just another name in the news. She became a reminder of how fragile trust can be, of how evil can live quietly next door, waiting for its chance to strike. Her story changed the way a nation saw safety, innocence, and justice. But for her family, the wound remains, deep, invisible, and unhealed. Because no verdict, no sentence, and no words can ever bring Marie back. After the verdict was read and the courtroom emptied, the echoes of Marie Davis's name didn't fade away. They lingered, in the streets of Christchurch, in the hearts of her classmates, and in the quiet moments of her grieving family. The city that had once felt safe was now haunted by the memory of a young girl who trusted the wrong person, and paid the ultimate price. For weeks, flowers covered the gates near her home. Photos, candles, and handwritten notes turned into a shrine, a silent promise that Marie would never be forgotten. People who had never met her came forward to mourn, to grieve, and to ask the same question. How could this happen? Marie's case shook the entire nation. It forced New Zealand to look closer at the cracks in its system, the ways predators could hide in plain sight, and how teenage girls could become victims without warning. Laws around child protection and online safety came under review. Schools began talking more openly about personal safety, trust, and boundaries. Police departments improved their missing person protocols, ensuring that cases like Marie's would be handled faster, with stronger coordination. But beyond the policies and reforms, something deeper changed, a collective awakening. People began to realize that monsters don't always wear masks. They can live next door, smile politely, wave at neighbors, and still harbor unimaginable darkness within. Marie's mother became a voice of strength amid devastation. She spoke publicly about her daughter's life, not as a victim, but as a light that was stolen too soon. She urged parents to talk to their children, to listen more, to never dismiss the small signs of fear or discomfort. In her grief, she turned her pain into purpose, hoping that Marie's story would protect others from the same fate. In interviews, she would say softly, "I want people to remember her for her smile, not for how she died." Those words became a mission, a call to remember the person, not just the crime. Years passed, but Christchurch never forgot. The Waimakariri River, once just a peaceful body of water, became a place of mourning. Every ripple on its surface seemed to carry the weight of what had been lost. For many, it wasn't just a river anymore, it was a reminder of innocence taken, of evil hiding in the ordinary. Community groups formed in Marie's name, working to educate young people about safety and trust. Posters with her photo and the message, "Remember Marie," appeared across schools and youth centers, a symbol of awareness, resilience, and love. And even though time moved on, every April, people still gather to honor her memory, lighting candles, sharing stories, keeping her spirit alive. Behind prison walls, Dean Cameron continues to serve his sentence. Reports say he rarely speaks about the crime, showing little remorse. For many, that silence is its own kind of evil, a chilling reminder of the coldness that ended Marie's life. But the focus has long shifted away from him. Because in the end, this story isn't about the killer. It's about the girl who deserved to live, and the community that refused to let her memory fade. Marie Davis's story stands as a tragic symbol, of trust betrayed, innocence stolen, and justice that came too late. But it's also a story of strength, of a family that refused to let evil win, of a city that stood together in sorrow, and of a nation that vowed to protect its children more fiercely than ever before. Her name now carries weight, not of tragedy alone, but of change. Because through her story, others learned to be cautious, to be aware, to be brave. Marie Davis was more than a headline. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. And though her life was cut short, her legacy continues, echoing in every conversation about safety, trust, and the hidden dangers that can exist so close to home. The monster next door was unmasked. But Marie's light, her laughter, her memory, still shines beyond the darkness he left behind. And that light will never go out.